Wabash Carnegie Public Library oral history program, and I'm interviewing Alonzo Mullendore at his home, 477 Minor Street, on January 31st, 1973. Mr. Mullendore, first of all, tell me where you were born and who your parents were.
Well, I was born in Walton, Indiana, or by Walton, and my father was Bert Mullendore, and my mother was Marthy Winters Mullendore.
And what date?
I was born August the 31st, 1905.
What did your dad do for a living?
My dad was a farmer for years,
Uh-huh.
and we lived on a farm for years. And in fact, I lived on a farm till I was about 17, and then I started to work at town. I had 3 brothers that was old enough to help my father on the farm, and I got a job Square D at Peru, and worked there about a year. And then I went to the American Stationery and fired a stationary boiler one winter. They used it for just heat, and did some other flunky job around there. And in the spring they laid me off because they didn't need the boiler fired, so I went to the auto parts at Peru and worked there. And was there about 6 months, and the thing went bankrupt or sold out. So then I went to, 6 of us left there and went up to Laporte and worked at the Rumley Thrashing Machine Works for about 3 months, I guess. No, about 2 months. Then they called us back to auto parts again, and we worked there. They said they was going to start it up, so we went back and worked there about only about 6 weeks, I guess, and then they did close it up for good. So then I went back up to Square D and worked there about a year and a half. That's where I met my wife, and so I got a job or a chance to come to work at Honeywell's, and that was 1926, along about March.
Yeah.
1926.
How did you find out about the job at Honeywell?
Well, there was a fellow that was a friend of mine in Peru, and he came up here to work in the tool room, Roy Martin. Have you interviewed him?
No. Is he still living?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. He will be a good one then.
And so he came up here, and then he got the superintendent of the auto parts, Dan Beamer, the job up here. And so I was riding from Peru out to Mexico one evening with Sam Harold, and they needed a punch press foreman, and Sam was a good one, so we was changing a tire going out, and they came along going out to Sam's house, and they hired Sam for a punch press foreman. And in the conversation they found out that I'd run screw machines at the Peru Auto Parts, so Kenneth Roby was the superintendent here, and he was with Beamer. And he offered me a job to come up here and go to work the following Monday. He said he'd start me in at 50 cents an hour, and if I could prove in 2 weeks I could set up my own job, why they'd give me 55. And by golly, that's how I came to work here.
Yeah.
So I've set up my own jobs, and was there then about 40, well, till 1970, 44 and a half years.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
when I started in running small hand screw machines, and I ran them about 3-4 months. So then they asked me about working on automatic screw machines, Brown Sharp automatics. And so I didn't know anything about them, but they taught me, and I picked up a lot of it myself. So I worked on the automatic screw machines then for about a year, and they put me on the second trick that summer, and they paid a dime more on the hour. Well, they'd give me a raise though after that again. I was up to 60 cents. So then they gave me a dime more on the hour to work nights, everybody. And we worked 12 hours a night or 11 hours a night and got paid for 12. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty good money back in them days, especially for a kid. Mm-hmm. And at that time though, I was 21 when I started to work here. And so then I learned to run automatic screw machines.
Were you already married then?
No, I got married in December the 23rd of 1926. So 26 was a big year for me.
Yeah.
It's the year I came to Honeywell, and that's the year I got married.
Yeah. Did you move over here then?
We lived in my wife's upstairs for about 3 months, and my wife worked at Square D at Peru. Uh-huh. And finally we did rent a house up here between Gackenheimer's and Frank Dunbar on Comstock Street, or Sinclair Street it was, and started housekeeping there. And the wife rode backward and forth on the Interurban for, I don't know, quite a while, a year and a half, maybe a year. So then they offered her a job at Honeywell's, and she quit down there and came to Honeywell's. And then they got slack and they laid her off, and they used to be sort of seasonal. They'd busy part of the time, and then they'd get slack spells. So she went to work down at the what was that showcase, Goldie? Wetzel Display Case Company. And by golly, she worked down there 11 years until war came along, and they kind of slowed down there. So then she went back to Honeywell's again and worked at Honeywell's through the war. And then,
You started back in 1926. What were they making?
Oh, their biggest product was D motors at that time to control coal-fired, hand-fired hot air jobs that operated the dampers and stack control and so on. And they made a lot of those. They'd run about 1,400 a day at that time, and through the busy season when I was working 24 hours a day. And we used to work 24 hours a day and 6 days a week when they were busy. And they made several other items. The thermostats of all types some had clocks and some didn't, and they controlled these motors too. And they made low water cutoffs, and then they right after that a while they designed the industrial motors and low water cutoffs and a lot of items like that they made. Circulators for hot water systems.
Where was the machine shop then?
It was there on Canal Street, right across from Slimmer's, where they, right there by the laundry, just south or west of the laundry.
Had the merger taken place yet?
No. I'll go back to now, since I'm married now, I'll go back to where the screw machines. After I worked in the screw machines for about a year and a half, they needed someone over in the experimental department to machine up a bunch of globe valves and butterfly valves and samples. And so they asked me about if I'd ever run on an engine lathe, and I said yes, some. So they wanted to know if I'd be willing to go over there for 2-3 weeks and machine up some parts for them. And I was working for Roby. And so I said, yeah, I'm working for you guys. I'll do whatever you want. So I went over there, and I must have got along pretty well on it because I was over there about, I suppose 6 weeks. And I got the job pretty well along. And Harry Kuntz was a foreman in the experimental department at that time, and P.F. Shivers was the engineer. He was in charge of all engineering at that time. So Kuntz came along one day and wanted to know if I'd ever did any layout work, bench work, and I said, no, I haven't. And he said, do you think you like it? I said, yeah, I believe I would. He said, would you like to be transferred over here permanently? And I said, yeah, I think I would, because I'd like this type work better than I do production work. So they finally got me transferred over there, and I stayed in the experimental department then about, I suppose 6 years, 5 or 6. And all the new products that come along, I had machine parts for them, and some of them we just helped assemble and so on. And so they transferred me then from under Kenneth Roby's jurisdiction over to Shivers there in experimental. Well, then they consolidated in about 1927, 28 along there. And after that, about a couple, 2-3 years with the experimental sort of they did away with it. They moved a lot of it to Minneapolis. So they put me over at the main plant again. Then this experimental was over in Wabash Street above Downs Coal Yard at that time. And so then they took us back over to the main plant, and they did away with Plant 2 over there. And they had, before that, did away with the old button factory down there. They had 4 plants at one time here. And so we had it all in this one plant then. And they just had production on a light scale. And at that time, industrial motors and the butterfly valves and items that would be a nuisance items to send to Minneapolis at that time because the production was too low on them. So they put it in production in big quantities. and we machine them temporary and do it here in Wabash. So they finally, when they sent me over there, then they started me setting up machines for Reed Matthews. He was in charge of the machine shop at that time. And so I'd set up jobs, and then they'd put operators on them, or I'd start them in on them, break them in on them. And I did that for a few years, and finally then the war came along, and Moseworth became superintendent. And so I don't know how it happened, but it worked in that I was made foreman of the machine shop. And then as the thing growed, while I was made general foreman, and had about, I suppose, through the war there, 6, 7, 8 foremen under me, because we were running 24 hours a day, and we got up to about 130, 40 people in the machine shop during the war, and was running 7 days a week then, and 3 shifts, and it was really, really rough. But we had a lot of success, and so after the war was over, why, I still stayed general foreman of the machine shop for several years. Well, I guess about 25 or 6 years, I don't know, till they moved, even after they moved it out to Bond Street. And so then after we was out there a while, why, Mose was transferred to Florida, and they sent Insler down from Micro to set the place up. So he did away with a lot of the, well, all the machine shop, in fact, but the sheet metal part of it. Excuse me. And so the machinery, all the automatic screw machine, hand screw machine, milling machines, drill presses, and all the, and most of the punch presses, we had 32 at that time, large punch press department. Everything was shipped out of here, but about 7 or 8 punch presses, and about, I guess, 3, 4, or 5 drill presses, and then the power brakes and the shears and the sheet metal equipment. And Wiedemann punch presses and that sort of thing stayed here. And Richard Prickett had charge of the sheet metal machine shop end of it, fabrication. So I was sort of like a man without a country at that time, and they put me in the methods department a while, and I worked in there for a little bit, and then they, at first, and then they started farming so much of this stuff out. While they was making this transfer, they needed someone up in purchasing that was familiar with the parts and the jigs and tools, because we furnish a lot of the tools and jigs that we farm stuff out. So they put me up in the purchasing department farming these parts out, helping McDaniels. And Ben Simmons was up there at the time too. So I worked with Mickey and Ben for a year and a half or so until they got these parts all established and got to making them themselves at the various places, Chicago plant, Minneapolis, and places where they transferred various items from here to be made there. And some of them they discontinued entirely and quit making them. And so they didn't need me anymore in the purchasing department. So then they put me down in production engineering. And I worked there then until I retired. In about 67 or 8, 67 I guess it was, why I got an ulcer, and I had to go to Cleveland and have that cut out, and I lost several months of work there. But when I got, well, it was earlier than that, because I was going to retire when I was 62, and so it must have been about 64 or 5 when I had that ulcer, because by the time it rolled around about 67, when I could have retired at 62, why, I felt pretty good, and I got to do a little investigating, and the insurance thing would have been an awkward thing, because I wasn't eligible for social or Medicare, and I wouldn't have been eligible for the group insurance, so I had to take out insurance for 3 years there, individual insurance or independent, and that would have been expensive. And I would have taken a 20% cut on my pension and also on Social Security if I'd have went at 62. So I just decided that I'd already lost about a year with that ulcer, and I'd be better off, since I was feeling good, to go ahead and work another 3 years, which I'm tickled to death I did. Mm-hmm. And at that time they put the automatic paint line in, the Ransburg paint line out there. And they were having a lot of difficulty in designing fixtures and carriers to attach the parts to the conveyor to run them through. So they finally put me on that job, designing that. So I got an idea there from these peg boards that you hook the hooks in, you know, with the crooks on them. And so I made some frames that worked the same way with crossbars on them, and then made various types of hooks that would hook in just like the hooks and peg boards. And it made them universal, and they could run a lot of things in those various frames. And they would index around and paint on both sides and what have you. And I just lucky stumbled onto something like that. I guess it really worked out because they'd had other fellows that tried it, and they never anybody come up with an idea that really worked out real good. So I made drawings of all those things, the fixtures that designed, and put dimensions on them and all, so they could make them new ones to replace them. So that's what I was doing yet when I retired in 1970. Was working with Roy, what's his name out, paint department. Prickett had charge of it at that time, and I was working for Ben Johnson. He was in charge of production engineering. And that about covers the thing
Up to date.
up to date there, yeah.
What, we'll go back on some of the things now. What happened, what did you notice when they merged? Did you notice anything when Honeywell merged?
Well, yeah, being in the experimental department, I noticed a lot. The way I got the picture, before they did emerge, they were competitors and each other's biggest competitors, Honeywell and the Minneapolis plant. Minneapolis plant had a good product for the way it was designed, but theirs, most of them was operated with chemical balances and so on, that damper controls and what have you, where Honeywell's was designed to operate with electrical motors, little electrical motors, the speed reduced down through gear trains and what have you to give them the power on the shafts and what have you. So Honeywell really had a more dependable product, and the way I understand, when they have these exhibits around over the country for the buyers and so on, builders to decide on, well, Honeywell's, they grade them, you know, like they do at fairs, and Honeywell's products would usually get a higher rating than the ones in Minneapolis because they were more dependable, like under riders and what have you. So that's why they decided to merger. In fact, Mr. Honeywell has told us about it. He contacted Sweat one time and suggested to him, Sweat was the manager in Minneapolis, that instead of being at each other's throat all the time, competitors, that if they'd merge and go together, they could really go places. And so Sweat said he'd think it over, and well, he did, and so they met in Chicago and worked out this thing, and made it, worked out some of the things and talked about it. Then later on, they made arrangements to have their patent attorneys and their lawyers and this and that to get together and draw the thing up. And it was really a big transaction. Mm-hmm. And to answer your question, what they did was took the good ideas from both products and consolidated them into one, redesigned and did away with a lot of them that the ideas that wasn't so good. And when they got those all run through the experimental department and engineering department and redesigned and consolidated the parts, you know, and did away with the ones that wasn't too desirable and went ahead with the improved ones, why they had a much better product for both of them than they did individually before. Yeah. So the experimental department was really busy for a while after they did emerge. We could tell that difference there.
When did you first meet Mr. Honeywell?
Well, I think the first time I met Mr. Honeywell would be pretty shortly after I went to work there, because at that time he used to come out through the shop and get acquainted. He made it a point to get acquainted with the employees. And when I first went to work there was only maybe 30, 40 people at that time. And it wasn't the busy time of the year when I went in there. And through the summers when they got busy. And he could call most of the people that was there very long by their first name. And I know it wasn't there very long till he came down through the shop and hi, Mully, and everybody called him Mully, and he'd always speak. So, and then they have a picnic that following summer, and of course he'd get around and get acquainted with all of us on that. And they used to have a Honeywell picnic every year. In fact, I got one of the pictures up there yet. It's got Mr. Honeywell in there years ago. I'll be glad to show it to you.
I think Augie Rump showed me the one up at Silver Lake.
Yeah, I believe it was.
Yeah, Augie showed me that.
Probably got one.
Well, Augie must have worked for you then.
Well, he didn't work for me then because he was a floor inspector at that time, and I was running screw machines at that time or setting them up. And Augie was floor inspector for several years there. And but he didn't work for me then. After I become general foreman of the machine shop, and then Augie worked for me.
Yeah. Was Mr. Honeywell knowledgeable about the business? And
Yes, I'd say very much so. And of course, Shivers is a fellow that had the mechanical ability as an engineer, and he was very capable on designing a lot of this stuff. And I know back through after they emerged there, he was very capable on helping select what we should change a little and keep, and what we should throw out and what have you. And he was a very capable engineer.
Mr. Honeywell was?
Well, Mr. Shivers, Paul Shivers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And after they consolidated, it wasn't very long then until Roby and, well, a lot of the people here was transferred to Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And Marlon Mills, I see he just died the other day too, and he was transferred up there, and he had charge of all stock handling and stores for several years. I know when I used to go to Minneapolis once in a while for the company, I'd usually meet him up there, and he'd tell me some of the trouble they had and the experiences and so on. And at that time, he had quite a job.
Did you ever see Mr. Honeywell get mad about anything?
Well, I never did personally. I wasn't that close to him.
Did you ever do any work for him on the outside when they were building the center?
Yes. Back the time they were building that center during the war, there was restrictions on some of the material they needed, and they had these ventilators that they have in various places that have louvers in them and screens, hardware cloth over to keep the birds out and what have you. He came up there one time and wanted somebody to volunteer to make those. Well, I don't remember anymore. I think he went to Mose on that, and at that time then Jim Ebbinghaus was production superintendent. Jim was my boss at that time, and was over me. And Jim came down and talked to me about it, and I want to know if I'd be willing to get some fellows together and sort of shape the thing up and engineer it myself, and have these fellows make those louvers down there. So I told him I'd be glad to help and do anything I could. So I went down and measured up the things, and we got with Mr. Honeywell and Jim and Mose and I, and doped out about how they ought to be in design, and he sort of visualized a picture in my mind as what he had in mind. So I got 3-4 of the boys that was pretty capable, and we worked on them nights and Sunday or Saturdays, and we made them up. I think it was about 14 in all, or 15. And then in the gym down there, they have these basketball back stocks that fold up the ceiling, and they wanted me to get some boys and hang them. They'd had some carpenters down there, I guess, on the job at hung them, and they got them crooked and messed up. So we went down and straightened that out and fixed them up and put some windlasses up in the attic so that they could crank them up. And we was going to motorize them, but we never got around to it. And then those card tables, they got down to Honeywell Center. They had just plain legs on them, and they're very practical latch on them. They're real solid if you ever noticed them. But Mr. Honeywell didn't like those straight legs. He wanted a little fancy. So he came up there and got with Bussy Martin, a tool-room foreman, and I, and he wanted to know if we couldn't come up with a tool that we could make some parts on the screw machine and put on those legs and kind of dress them up a little bit. So we sketched out some various things, and he did too, and came up with a shape of fixture that he thought for him that he liked, and Bus made the form tool, and we set her up down in the basement on the hand screws and run him out a few of those, and he had them put on down there, welded on, and boy, it's just what he wanted. And so, gee, I don't know how many of those we made, but we made a lot of them there in the shop for him. And all of those cables they had, they put those fancy gadgets, ornamental gadgets on the legs. It did improve the looks of them a lot. Yeah.
Was Mr. Honeywell, was he actively following every step of the procedure when you were doing these little jobs?
Well, we didn't see him too much at the time. He'd come around once in a while and see how he was doing, and but he was always seemed to be pretty well pleased. Of course, we knew the type man he was. It had to be just so-so.
You were lucky.
Yeah, and so we tried to be as near perfectionist as we could to satisfy him.
Were you just drawing your regular pay from the factory and overtime, or?
Well, if I remember right, when we put time in down there, I kept track of the hours, and they paid me with a different check on that, what they did at the factory, and the other boys too. I believe that's the way it worked out. So they paid us over and above what we got at the factory by the hour. And then there was some lights. He tried to buy some lights that was ornamental fixtures for down in the skating rink, and one in the hall there, the round stairway that goes down there, round turn. And we worked on some lights there, chandeliers for him, and made those up. Cecil Bender and it was about 3. Gene Ranstead helped out some, and I worked on them some, and we spent quite a bit of time on some of those things. It was special. Then I know Gene went out and did some welding for him on canopies and so on, frames out at the studio.
Yeah, he told me about those.
Yeah, Gene did a lot of work out there.
Did you know Jim Weiss when he worked down there?
Oh, yeah.
In the foundry?
Yeah, they had a foundry that was up on the second floor. I knew Forrest and Jim and Eddie. And in fact, the foundry, when I first got acquainted with the Weiss boys, it was over there by the site of Downs Schoolyard, and the experimental and the engineering department was upstairs there. And of course, they worked downstairs. The pattern shop was upstairs. Forrest worked up there, and he had a fellow or two helping him most of the time. And Eddie did molding down in the foundry there, and Jim, he was a foreman over at the old button factory at that time, and they made this Shivers braiding control over there, assembled them, and they had the automatic screw machines moved in there at that time too. They moved them from the main plant down to the old button factory after I left and went over to experimental. And I don't remember whether Jim, well, after they consolidated, then I think they got Jim back up into that's when he went into the foundry with Forrest and Eddie. And then later on, after they'd moved to the foundry from there over here in this new building, up on the second floor, the cement floor and everything, cement building, why they decided that they needed that room for something else, and they worked out a deal with the Weiss boys, and they took the foundry equipment over with the agreement that they'd make casting for Honeywell. He'd have priority on their business. That is, they'd get his casting first, and then if they had capacity for more, outside, it was all right, but he wanted his first. And they did that for several years. This industrial motor was a big item. The globe valves, butterfly valves. The industrial motor was aluminum, and they made the medium one and the small one. And the globe valves and butterfly valves were brass castings, and they had to be pressure tight and free of porosity and leakage and so on. They water test them, make sure that they wouldn't leak. And they made good castings out there. Those boys were really capable. And after they quit the Weiss boys and sent the patterns up to Laval foundries and so on, we had a lot of trouble.
Did you?
Leakage. And a lot of trouble with core shifts and what have you in these industrial motors, and we have to work with them and get the bugs picked out again. But the Weiss boys, they knew just how to vent those to get rid of the gas, to eliminate porosity, and they was really clever on that.
Was there any time during the Depression that you didn't work a full week, or?
Yeah, back through the Depression, got down to where there was only 3 of us in the machine shop, and it was Doc Leland and Glenn Custer and I. And Doc was a personnel director at that time, but they wasn't hiring or firing anybody, so by golly, they didn't have anything much for Doc to do up there. So he came down and would run small screw machines. I'd set them up, Doc would run. And Kess, if they needed a little fixture made in the tool room or something, like Kess was a tool and die maker, he'd make it. And once in a while, I'd go in and help Kess, and then he'd come out in the shop, and between the 3 of us, we got down to where for about 3 weeks we was only working 3 half-days a week. And then it picked up a little, and we got back on full-time again. But that was about all the time I lost, was for a period of about 3 weeks. I got about 3 half-days a week. And the rest of the time then I was back to full 5.5 days.
Did you start to get concerned about your job?
Yes, we all did. We all did. I know one time, it's the only time I think I ever asked for a raise all the time I worked there. I hadn't had one for quite a while, and that was when this Depression came along, you know. Harry Kuntz was my boss then, he hadn't left yet. He came along one morning and I said, Harry, see, you know, I haven't had a raise for a long time, Harry. I believe I ought to have a raise, don't you? I've been trying to do a good job. Well, he said, you've been doing a good job, all right, Molly, but he said, I couldn't get you a raise if my life depended on it. And he said, you're just lucky you're working. Don't you know there's a Depression sweeping the country? And I said, yeah, I read about it and heard about it. He said, you're going to hear more, too, pretty soon. Well, it wasn't but about a week or two until they gave us a 10% cut in our wages. Yeah. And then they gave us 2.5, if I remember, after that. Altogether, about 20% they cut our wages. And then during that time, too, is when we went down to 3 half-days a week there. Yeah. And then finally, when the thing tapered out a little, they gave us that 20% back all at once, the ones that was there. They didn't give it back in 3 jerks like they took it away from us. We thought that was very kind of them. Yeah. Tickled us very much.
How about was there any internal charitable organization or anything for the ones that weren't working as much as you were? Or?
Well, I know at one time Mr. Honeywell said that if we would set up a pool, give to a pool to buy milk for the needy kids around town.
Did you ever get involved in any of his photography hobby or motion picture?
No, I never did. He used to take the salaried personnel and the foreman and so on out to the studio once in a while, and he'd have arrangements made to put on a big feed out there and show some pictures and have a party. We have a few drinks and everybody let their hair down and really have a good time. And he would tell us about all different things that he did and so on, but and he'd show some of the pictures, but give us a little lecture and what have you, different times. But as far as getting actually involved in them myself personally, I was always too busy down there with problems in the machine shop.
Did you ever remember any incident that he told you that stuck in your mind?
Oh yeah, several. The time that one time we was out there and he showed us pictures of an island that he'd bought off of the coast of Florida, about 35 miles out, I guess, the way I understand it. I never was out there, but I saw a lot of pictures of it, and it was an estate that some fellow had started to build a mansion on it and what have you, and he died, and so Mr. Honeywell bought the thing. And he went ahead and finished this mansion up, and they put a lighthouse out there on it. And he was showing us pictures then where the waves would wash up on the sand and wash it away. And so he got an outfit to come in there and drive this corrugated piling. The piece was about 18 feet long, and they drove that down about 3 feet wide, clear around that island to keep the sand, the waves from washing the sand out. And then they hauled in on barges enough sand to fill that in, back of that piling. And they had this painted all around there, down to the water level. And then that time they had a natural harbor in there, a bay, where people would come out with their boats and they'd park them in there to get them out of the waves, you know. And he wanted mooring posts for that. And one time there, he had a lot of cedar in there, and they had the boys in the pattern shop and the foundry there working on those mooring posts. And I went up and worked some, helped them some on it in evenings and Saturdays, afternoons, a little. And they put them in there, and at that time, Mr. Honeywell was appointed president of the 100 Club, I guess. The way I understand it, an ordinary millionaire isn't eligible for membership. You got to be a multimillionaire. Well, he was president of it at this time, and they had a big meeting out there, and the people come in their boats. That's why he wanted these mooring posts and so on at this estate. And also the palms didn't quite suit him there. He was telling us about it, so he bought a bunch of palm trees in some island someplace and contracted some construction outfit to dig those up and preserve them by putting burlap around them, and they loaded them on barges and sneaked them up there to his island. And we made I got to help work on that too. He made a sort of a derrick or a gadget up out of angle iron, hoist to put on the front of a tractor down there, that they could pick these big palms up off of these barges and take them over and set them in holes, and he'd have them place them wherever he wanted them to make them look right and what have you. And he showed us pictures of that out there one night and told us about it, and that always stuck in my mind because it was a mammoth project. And then he'd show us pictures several times. I remember when he'd go fishing for marlin and sailfish and what have you, and down there along the Union River and places. And I've always remembered that because he really did some fine fishing there. I guess he must have got tired of it or didn't have time to carry on or something. But
what would you say Mr. Honeywell's outstanding characteristic was?
Well, I don't know. I think he was really interested in the community here and the people, and he's friends around Wabash, and well, he's friends all over the world. He had friends about all over the world, I think, after he become known that way.
Do you remember the time that he took the plant up to see a presidential candidate that came through on the train?
No, I don't remember that.
When Landon came to town?
Yeah, I do remember that too. Yeah, I remember that.
What do you remember?
Well, that's pretty vague in my mind. If I remember right, we was having some difficulty at that time, and I stayed down to the shop to work something out. I don't think I got up there. I'm sure I didn't go up, but I do remember the incident.
Do you remember when the company union was formed?
Oh, yeah.
Now, were you salary or were you still hourly employee?
I was still hourly at that time. They paid me per hour, but I was working a lot of overtime. I was making pretty good money at that time. Yeah.
Did they approach you?
No, I was general
help?
foreman of the machine shop, but I wasn't on salary.
Yeah.
And
you were still on hourly wages as general foreman. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they didn't approach you to form a union or to help form it or anything?
No, they didn't. The organizing committee didn't approach me to join it or anything like that.
So you never had to join it then, or never did?
I never did belong to the union. I never was eligible, I guess. I was on the management side there. They always considered me that way, and so they never asked me to join.
Was there amiable relations between the company when they formed the company union?
Well, yeah, when they had the company union there, why, as far as I know, the employees was pretty well satisfied there at Honeywell's. And I know at different times you'd hear rumors that some outside organization was going to try to organize there and this and that, but they never did it, to my knowledge, that I know of. At that time, and then finally they did form the Employees Representative Association, I believe they called it, and that was right back during the war, and start of the war, and they always appointed their officers out of the laboring people right there in the shop, president of the union and so on. The employees would vote on them, and when they'd have any problems come up of any kind or difficulties, well, they'd always sit down up in the conference room around the table and hash the thing over and come up with a solution, and it worked very well. And I'd say they followed the trend of what the employees in Minneapolis got through the international unions, and didn't have to pay a whole lot of high union wage or fees here like they did in Minneapolis. But I know when they get another holiday or pay or a raise, why we get the same thing down here.
Do you remember when they formed the national or the international when that took over?
Yeah.
Do you remember the events surrounding those?
Yeah, I remember that. There was a lot of unfavorable literature publicized about mows and lies. A lot of it was lies.
What position were you in at that time when they...
I had charge of machine shop, general foreman machine shop.
Were you still on hourly? Or were you
I'd
head
been on salary several years then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what were the circumstances then that cropped up that formed that the International Union?
Well, I don't know if I should go into it.
Well,
I don't think I better.
It's history. We can scratch it out later.
Well, it was two fellows there, Clarence Boyer and Art Sloop, worked with a organizer that come in here for the international, the IUE.
Yeah.
And they met over at the hotel, and I don't know. I've been told that he sort of educated them and told them what to do and how to go about organizing and what have you. And they finally did get it organized. And it went to a vote. And I don't remember at that time, when they had a vote there, I had hurt my back. I got knocked off of an 8-foot step ladder and crushed a vertebrae, and I laid for 15 days out there in a hospital on a board.
This was work-related or home-related? This was a work-related injury?
No, it was here at home.
Oh, you were doing it
here
at home?
Yeah, trimming a tree. And they had the vote for the International Union while I was out in the hospital. So I'm not too familiar with all the activities, only what I was told that went on there at that time.
Was, to your knowledge, was management actively participating one way or the other at that time?
Well,
were they neutral or?
They wasn't exactly neutral. Management was busy trying to get the employees to realize exactly the benefits they did have and would have even without an international. But they was told it would be entirely up to them. I mean, if that's what they wanted, why, that's what they'd have to live with, and management would do the same. They would stick right to their side of the bargain and agreement, and they'd expect the employees to do the same.
Looking back, what would your reaction be now? Looking back to the formation of the International and that, would you say it was good, it was bad, or it was neither?
Well, some phases of it maybe is good, and some phases of it's not so good. Yeah. So, I mean, everything has good and bad points. Yeah. And I personally feel that if they'd have went along with the Employee Representative Association and operated like they did over those period of years it was in effect, that the employees in Honeywell would have been about as well off as, maybe better off than they are the way it is. Of course, you never, that's only my guess. You never know for sure.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Were you concerned, or what was your reaction when Bob Ensler came down here from Freeport with his group? What was your reaction?
Well, my reaction to there, my thoughts was that I was sorry to see it happen because there was so many jobs that we'd lived with down here, all of us, for years and growed up with. In fact, that the low water cutoffs and the diaphragm valves and the butterfly valves and the globe valves, I helped design all those things when I worked in the experimental department, and then over the period of years we manufactured the parts in the machine shop, and I was responsible for all those. And when he came down and he talked about transferring these various items out and discontinuing a lot of them entirely, not even make them anymore, take them clear out of the picture, why, it was a pretty sad situation, you know. And so I wasn't in favor of it. I wasn't happy about it. And like I said, when they sold the machinery, well, transferred some of it out to Minneapolis, anything that they wanted up there, why, and Chicago, or those branches where they shipped these items, they had a chance to come down there and pick machines out, and they didn't take anything, only what was either almost new or a special machine for a certain job. All the rest of the stuff they had, like ordinary screw machines, automatic and hand screws, and engine lathes, and drill presses and punch presses. They had all that stuff in their own locality. So they finally ended up selling the balance of that to a used machine dealer up at, I don't know, Elkhart or somewhere up in there. And they came in with these big moving outfits and big flat bottom trucks and picked them up, and put them on and loaded them up. And when I went out of there one day at noon, and they had about 3 truckloads of that machinery sitting out there lined up, getting ready to take off, you couldn't keep tears from the tears coming on your cheek a little bit.
How bad?
Because we lived with that for years and grew up with it and fought to get it, and through our management proved it was necessary we get it and what have you, and then see a guy come in here like Ensler from up there and mess the thing all up, and of course, wasn't anything to do about it. I had to go along with him.
Yeah.
But I wasn't happy about it.
Did you ever think that at that time that possibly this was the end of Honeywell here in Wabash?
Oh, you'd hear all kind of rumors. No, I didn't really think so, because I personally felt that by Mr. Honeywell owning that ground out there to start with, and by the company working out a deal with him where they build those buildings on it. At that time they had 3, 4, 5. They had five bays out there, 385 feet long, and each one of them was 50 feet wide. And they had quite an investment there, and I kind of felt that Honeywell would find some use for them right down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they had a lot of dampers. It was mostly sheet metal out there at that time after they got rid of the machine shop. The fact that it was all sheet metal and assembly.
Yeah. Did you get along with Shivers pretty well?
Yes, I got along with Shivers real well, and never had any trouble with him to speak of at all.
Yeah.
He was plain talking, and what he thought he said, and I was about the same way, what I thought I said, and
you understood each other.
We understood each other.
Yeah. How about when Jim Ebbinghaus was up there as in management? Was he ever directly over you?
Yes, Jim. I worked for Jim for several years when he was the production superintendent down here before Ensler came down.
Mm-hmm.
And he was production superintendent up until they transferred Mose Worth. Mm-hmm. And Jim and I always got along very well. He was a nice fellow to work for. I liked Jim very much.
How about Mose Worth?
I liked Mose a lot, very much. He was real nice to work for. And he had a lot of consideration for everybody. Mm. And he was just like tried to be like a father to everybody. He was interested in everybody's problems,
right,
regardless of what they was. He was Mose Worth was one of the most intelligent men for his age that I ever had the privilege of associating with, I'm sure. Most capable.
Do you think that most of the employees felt that Mose got a fair deal or not when they transferred him?
Well, I don't know what Mose got the other end. I talked to Mose several times after that, and he thought it was one of the best things that ever happened to him personally, as far as he was concerned, because he went down there and bought him a nice home, and he had 2 cars, one for him and one for Mary Alice, and he must have made pretty good money down there, and they gave him a job that perhaps wasn't near as much
demanding,
as this one up here was, and he seemed to be pretty well pleased down there. I went through the plant down there one time when I went down to Florida one winter, and it's a nice place. Of course, it wasn't big then like it is now. Just
You know, another question I always ask all the retired employees, and I get varied reactions, is do you feel that the years that you worked at Honeywell that you were adequately compensated for your work? I'm not talking about your pension. I mean the times that you were working there at 60 cents an hour, 80 cents an hour.
Well, I think I feel that I was pretty much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do.
Yeah.
I don't have any complaints or any regrets really, because like I say, there's only one time I ever asked for a raise at Honeywell, and I didn't get it. And that's when Harry Coons told me I was lucky to even be working.
Yeah.
And you know, after they did go back to working, I mean, after they got back on full time, and they gave us a 20% back that they'd cut us and what have you. Well, it went along, I don't know, several months, and one morning Harry came down and he said, remember, about 3 years ago you asked me for an increase, Mully? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I finally got around to getting you one this morning. He said, this morning as of 8 o'clock you started drawing a dime more on the hour.
Yeah.
And I didn't intend to ask him any more for it. He did.
Yeah.
And I suppose he felt that I deserved it, or he wouldn't have did it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. How about the pension? How are your feelings on the pension?
well, I'm tickled to death with the pension I got, because when they started out on the salaried people there, it wasn't as much as it was when I retired. And I know there was some of the people that retired earlier, like Bus Martin and Kester and those fellows, that didn't get as much per month as in reference to what they drawed as they was getting when I retired. And when I retired, I think it was up to about $5 on the month for each year you've been there. See?
Yeah.
And so it made me a pretty good pension.
Do you keep in contact with the old employees very much, or just as you run onto them?
Oh, I always been active in the Minregs down there, and I was president of it, or chairman of it one year while I was working there. And I knew all the people at that time and got acquainted with the new ones that came in, and from Ramsey. And so I go to the Minregs about every time they have a meeting, and I stay familiar with them that way. And the ones that's retired, like Kester and Bussy and them, I meet them occasionally there, visit them a little. Yeah, I Howard Smith. And now McNeely, I haven't been out there. Have you saw George McNeely yet?
No, I haven't.
He's an old timer.
I talked to Doc Leland on the phone, and Doc's back's hurting pretty bad, and begged off an interview until he felt better.
I see. Doc isn't too good.
Well, I guess when you have back problems, I guess you ought to know. He just didn't feel like it. And,
I see.
He said they weren't going to Florida. And have you taken a winter vacation since you've been retired?
Me?
Yes.
Well, we went down to Florida last year for about 2 weeks, and the year before for about 2 weeks, but that was all.
Yeah. Do you miss the active work day or not?
Well, not so much now since I'm used to it, but I did at first.
Did you?
Yeah, I liked my work down there, and I always did like it at Honeywell, or I wouldn't have stayed so long.
Right.
But, well, by working up there at Rumley Thrashing Machine Works, that was big stuff mostly, and hazardous, some of it, dangerous. And then the other type work I did, like Square D and down to American Stationery and so on, when I was a younger fellow, they didn't seem like there was any future in it like they would be when I came to Honeywell, and it was the type work that appealed to me. It wasn't big and bunglesome and dangerous and hazardous, and yet it wasn't too little like too tedious, and yet it was precision, something you could be proud of doing. And they always treated me nice and gave me an opportunity to progress or advance and learn more, and I always grasped it when they'd offer me something. I'd tell them, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to, learn something more, and it paid off. So I still think that, well, I know if a man came into Honeywell, it was any time that I was there, that 44 years and a half, and tried to get ahead, why, he could. I mean, you don't have to put too much extra effort forth, and just do a little more than you'd have to get by, and a little better than you'd have to get by, and sooner or later it's recognized and somebody does something about it. George Rapp, he's out there now. He came in there from, he's a foreman out there. He came into the machine shop when he came back from the service, and he wasn't there, I don't suppose, a week until Augie Rumpler, the first one, told me. He said, boy, that kid got something on the ball. He said, you can explain things to him, and he goes right ahead. And, well, I had my eye on George, too, at the time. I'd talked to him some, and you can pretty well tell when you're familiar with people. And we had him on hand screw machines then. And so I told Augie, well, let's help him all we can and bring him right along. And then later on, we put him down in the basement and on hand screw machines down there. And he was only down there a couple of weeks. And Gene Ranstead and Carl Yennis down there told me, I said, boy, that old George, he got a lot on the ball for a young chap. And so then they put him over on hand screw machine, or automatic screw machines later on, and he learned that fast. So George is a type person that he had a lot of ambition, and he didn't need a lot of motivating by somebody else to take an interest in things and get ahead. And he had the ability to grasp the knowledge, and he had a good head on him. And he went up, and he came in there, started in on a hand screw machine just like I did, and didn't know much about them, but he worked up, and today he's, I guess, production superintendent out there now, or shop foreman. I don't know what George is doing.
Do you go back at the factory every now and then?
Oh, once in a while I drop in, and as soon as I get in, well, it's high molly this, and you can't get very far very fast because everybody wants to stop and talk and want to know how you are and what have you, and carry on conversation, and I don't like to bother the help too much, so I don't go out too often.
Yeah.
I do quite a little work for them out there yet, making special shelving or fixtures and things occasionally if it's woodwork. I got a little woodwork shop down in the basement, and I did it for just a hobby shop and remodeling around the house and things. And when I was working at Honeywell's, now it kind of comes in handy. I got saws, a band saw, and 8-inch table saw and what have you, drill press, and just some machines that come in handy for making things like that.
Some of the other people I've interviewed, you might have some reaction to. Phil Magner Sr.
Yeah.
Did you work for Phil? Or Phil?
No, I didn't work for Phil. Phil had charge of the experimental laboratory down in the basement there at the main plant. And Phil's helped me a lot in the past. I know if I had a problem and didn't know the answer, I could get down and talk to Phil about it. And maybe it was something entirely different than anything that Phil was familiar with, but he knew just what book to pick up and hand to me, and he'd say, you read this, and I think you get your answer. And he did it more than once with me, and I get my own answer, but he knew just where to go find what he didn't know or what you didn't know.
Yeah.
And Phil helped me a lot, and he was a wonderful fellow. He's always, our associations have always been very pleasant, been good friends.
I interviewed Carl Schwab over at Lime, Ohio, also.
Yeah. Carl worked up in the service department for years.
Yeah. He's 92 years old.
Yeah.
Great health.
He's right up there.
Yeah, great health. And,
I knew Carl before he went to work in Honeywell's. He was selling shoes.
Right.
So on.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, I bought several pair of shoes off of him.
Art Schenkel, of course, is retired.
Yeah. I see. Art was over the other day. He's been working on this whistle thing. Train whistles here going by.
He had a rather interesting story where when he first went to Honeywell, maybe you'd remember, he apprenticed to the Austrian glass blower. Do you remember when the glass blower was there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Art was the apprentice to the glass blower for a year or something. And they were making some kind of a vacuum tube, or I don't know exactly what the...
mercury tube.
Mercury tube.
Yeah.
Was it,
Yeah, they made them there for a while. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember a fellow named Wiggs, I believe.
Something
like that. He came in there, and in the experimental department, he set this thing up. They had gas and oxygen that they'd heat that, and he was a professional glass blower, and he set that thing up. And we have to make these little wires that would go in there, and they'd put that molded glass around that tube and had to seal them in tight. And I forget the name of that wire. It was it's like the filament in tungsten wire. Yeah, it would stand tremendous temperatures without.
Howard Smith was very interesting.
Yeah, Howard worked in the service department for years up there.
Right.
And assembly. He assembled these D motors and.
He told me one story about that D motor and
industrial motors.
how he got.
And Irvin's was running the Peru at that time. And I just had a date with a wife for a couple of dates, and she was going down to the city park, the west end of Main Street, and she met a girlfriend on the inner Irvin, and my uncle happened to be sitting right behind him. And the wife said down to this girlfriend, and she told her, said, I got a new boyfriend. And the girlfriend said, what's his name? She said, Alonzo Mullendore. And of course, my uncle, he pricked his ears up right away. And this lady, or this other friend of my wife said, well, what is he, a Dago? My wife got a big kick out of it. My uncle got a big kick out of it. I said, what is he, a Dago?
Did your other brothers have unusual first names?
No.
I shouldn't say Alonzo's an unusual first name.
No, you see it occasionally in paper, Alonzo, so-and-so, but not too often. Why, no, Harvey was my one brother. He worked at Honeywell's a lot of years, and he's deceased now. He died when he was 54 with a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked in machine shop, ran screw machines and what have you. And then Clayton is the brother that I have out in California. And he went out there when he was about 20. And he liked it so well, he just stayed out there. He made that his home. And then Edgar was a baby of the family, and he got life in World War II. He was in this shuttle bombing that the bombers would load up in England, and
Mm-hmm.
they'd be assigned a target to bomb on the way over to Russia, and then they'd drop their bombs, and they'd land in Russia and load up again and hit another one on the way back. And on his 15th mission, he was shot down.
Yeah. Was he living here in Wabash then?
No, he was living in Peru.
Mm.
Then I have two sisters, Irene, and she was the oldest one in the family, and then Marie was the second, and I was the third child.
Do you have children?
No, I have a stepson.
Yeah, just the one.
Yeah, Bob Ehlers, Robert Paul Ehlers is his name. Nice boy. He's working for Borg Warner.
Borg Warner.
Yeah, he has a good job. He degree out of IU. In the personnel end of it, and negotiating. He gets on the negotiations and studied union law and what have you.
You know, looking at you, it's hard to believe that just looking at you that you're retired. Really, I mean.
I'm 67 now.
Yeah, I mean physically you look like you could still go down, put in a good 12-hour day at 60 cents an hour.
I'm in pretty good shape outside of my eye, and my stomach's good now since they operated on it at Cleveland. They fixed me up there. They did a pretty good job when they overhauled me there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did another question I like to ask, since there's very little I've asked you about the Depression, did you come in contact at any time with the Ku Klux Klan during the 20s?
Yeah, before I went to work at Honeywell.
Did you? What was? Tell me the.
Well, the Ku Klux, at that time I was working for Square D,
Uh-huh.
and Harry Temple was my boss, and he had charge of what they call a loading dock down there. And so he kept talking a little about the Ku Klux Klan, and at that time they were very active. They had them paraded around, you know, with their white hats and suits. Nobody knew who was a Klan and who wasn't. And so he asked me how I'd like to get into them, and I said, well, I don't know, it sort of looks interesting. Of course, I was only about 17, 18 then, and looking for adventure. So he had me to come in one evening, and he said, we'll go up and to a meeting. He said, I'm invited up. He said, and I'll take you along up and as a guest. And he said, we'll both go together. So by golly, I went in, and he took me up on West 3rd Street. And after I got up there a little while, then I realized that he was a member.
Uh-huh.
And so they had their meeting, and they propositioned me to join, which I did. And I used to have my hat and my gowns and what have you, linen outfit, and then go around to have these parades. And nobody knew who was and who wasn't at that time. But after I left the Square D, I got away from Harry, then I become inactive, and it finally broke up in Peru, and I never had any associations with them after that, or any desire to have, really.
By the time you got to Wabash, it was all over, huh?
Oh, long before I got to Wabash.
Yeah. That's a rather interesting chapter in Indiana history, you know?
It is.
The Ku Klux Klan.
Well, yeah, I can remember when, boy, they had some big parades down in Peru.
Yeah.
And there was fellas that didn't, that wasn't in the parade, that didn't have the gowns on, would be standing around the corner and on the corners, and if somebody is resentful about it, why, you just didn't want to say too much, you know, in public, because you didn't know who was and who wasn't.
Yeah.
And I know I've seen occasions where somebody would get a little smart with the boy with a robe on, and it wouldn't be long until there'd be a dozen plain clothes guys there, and they were Klans too, you know.
Yeah.
But, the guy didn't even know that he was in the midst of some.
Yeah.
And you never knew. But that was one thing that I've heard people argue about, that if it was an organization you had to be ashamed of and cover up your face, they didn't want any part of it, you know. I've heard that remark made a lot.
Yeah.
And there might be a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's
But they claimed that the reason they did that is so that they could be beneficial to the public in whole and still not anybody know who they were or anything about it. It's sort of a secret organization so far as people knowing who was and who wasn't.
Yeah.
But like I say, I was a young man looking for adventure, and
Yeah.
boss got me into it, and I had a lot of confidence in him because he was my boss. So.
Yeah. Did you belong to a church over all these years?
Christian church.
Yeah. Active?
No, well, not real active. Different times I went real study and then fade away a while. I didn't belong to the Christian church, and I joined the Christian church here, and Reverend Cartwright was a minister here, which is several years ago.
That was the first Reverend Cartwright.
Mm-hmm.
You've got one now again.
Yeah.
Right.
This was George.
George Washington Cartwright. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice guy, real nice guy. I knew him.
Mm-hmm. You did you know him?
Oh yeah.
The one that was here before?
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
he's a nice fellow. In fact, I thought more of him. Well, I was better acquainted with him than any minister at the church that they've ever had there. But I liked George.
Yeah.
He just seemed to leave.
What were your hobbies over the years?
Oh, fishing, hunting, and little woodwork thing, making things out of woodwork and what have you. I get all the steel work I wanted there at Honeywell, you know, working on steel. But I never was too much of a ball fan. I like baseball and basketball, but football, I never cared for that. I never played it and didn't know anything about the game. Never went to a school that had it, really, when I was younger.
Yeah. What would you say the happiest period of your life has been? As you look back, is it now, or was it 25 years ago, or 40 years ago? Or?
Oh, I don't know. I was always pretty happy so far as my life was concerned. I'd say from the time I was married, I never had a whole lot of grief and this and that, and unhappy moments. But I know there was a period there just before the International got in at Honeywell that I really liked my job then and looked forward to the mornings when I could get down and go to work, because I feel like it every day I accomplished a lot, and I thought everybody down there liked me pretty well, and I felt that way, and I know they all cooperated, and I really enjoyed going to work.
Yeah.
More so than I did after.
Who was the management at that time?
Mose and Jim.
Yeah. Do you think that would be probably the greatest contributing factor?
Well, yes, because they was pretty reasonable and sympathetic and understanding, and all those things add up to making your job more pleasant.
Yeah.
You got somebody that's on your neck all the time, and no matter how hard you work or what you accomplish, it's not enough, and they're still riding you for more. Why? It isn't too desirable. But those fellows, if we didn't accomplish something that maybe we should have, why, they seemed to understand why, because usually we had a good reason. Something went wrong that was beyond our control or what have you.
Do you remember when Ben Simmons went to Saudi Arabia? Or was Ben working for you then? Or?
No, he was working direct for Mose at that time. He was an assistant to Mose. There's another fellow that went to work on the drill presses in the machine shop during World War II.
Right.
On a second trick, I think. And we put him over on a hand screw, working off of a fellow by the name of Don Mishler, running facing blanks for prism holders that went into a telescope sight that we made. And old Don came to me one morning after he'd worked 2-3 weeks on days and then on nights, and he said, "Boy, that guy on nights is a good employee." He said, "Every morning I come in, my machine's all cleaned up, the tools are sharpened, they're all set, all I got to do is take off." He said, "In fact, he leaves my machine in better shape than I leave it for him." And so he said, "I try to every night have it in just as good a shape for him as Either for me. Well, when you got two fellows working opposite each other on a machine with that sort of an attitude towards each other, they got to be a couple of all right guys.
Uh-huh.
And because so many times, why, the day guys are always giving the night guys a devil, and vice versa, and at each other's throats all the time. And you got to keep them sort of coordinated and
Smooth.
yeah, working smooth. But those guys, they liked each other, and they were happy about working opposite each other. And then later on, why, I think Ben then was elected eventually president of the Employees Representative Association. And before he got out of that, why, they put him in over the damper department doing some supervisory work and what have you.
Yeah.
So then I guess he wasn't eligible for both, and so I think then they had an election and elected another person for president of the union, and Ben had charge of the dampers then over there for several years. And then they finally moved it out to Bond Street, and they built his first building out there. And it used to be over there in the old Talbert building across the street that burned where that parking lot is there now. And then out there where they made Ben an assistant to most. He wasn't an assistant general manager, most said, but he was assistant to the general manager. That was the way he put it. And Ben was always very capable, good talker.
Yeah.
And he could talk before the public real well. Very well educated.
Did you ever have, in your supervisor position, did you ever have trouble running men, or wished you'd had more training in handling men, or?
Oh yeah, I've wished that. I wished I had more education too.
Yes.
A lot of times, and I did get a little more. I know I took a correspondence course several years back of modern machine shop work, and the Modern Machine Shop Institute out of Detroit, and that helped me a lot. I learned a lot in that.
But I mean, you were relatively a young man when the war came on, and there you were. You had what, a couple hundred employees in your shop, in your machine shop, over
140.
You had 140. Did your confidence grow as things progressed, or?
Well, as the problems came up, you sort of had to deal with each one individually and work the thing out. And I know we had 3 shifts on. And at first we had a problem of communications, or passing things on from one department to another. Finally got an idea, maybe we ought to have a meeting about 2 evenings or afternoons a week and get the foreman in there from all shifts, and we'd go over these various things, and insisted that they offer suggestions and so on and bring it out so that we could all profit by it. And then we had a fellow appointed that would make notes of all these of the meeting, and sort of a secretary. And then we'd have this typed and give a copy to each one of the fellows that was on the head of the shift. And Cyril Cole was head of the second shift for quite a while. Stu Martin was the third for a long time during the war there. And Gene Ranstead on days, and Jim Job and what have you. But it helped a lot after we started having those meetings, because everybody understood everybody, and some guy had a problem, he'd bring it up, and we all heard the answers to the solution of it and so on. And that did help a lot. It kept us kept things coordinated, and information passed on the line, and no breakdowns in communications as much as there was before that.
In all those years, I'm sure that you saw both types of supervisors, the ones that couldn't handle men and the ones that were great at it.
Yeah, I can, and it was outstanding when you'd get a hold. They'd get a hold of some guy that couldn't handle him. Well, he'd always have trouble, and the people didn't like him, and what have you. And,
how did you get along with old Mick? You were at the end of your working days.
Mickey?
Yeah.
Real well.
Did you?
Yeah. Mickey was a good purchasing agent, and
great company man.
Oh yeah, and he had a lot of connections. I mean, he could get things when the average purchasing agent couldn't. I know back during the war, he established quite a reputation for himself of having connections around the various places, suppliers in the country, that he could get things for Minneapolis that the guy up there couldn't get himself. And
Yeah.
sometime like steel, certain types of steel, special tubing and what have you. And they worked through make some on that.
Mhm.
He helped them out on that. At least that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was familiar with the tooling because I grew up with it, and the various parts and the precision part of it, and that's why they put me up there in purchasing. And then I was familiar too with several sources of supplies that had automatic screw machine departments and hand screws and various types of machinery, because if we get in a big jam and the thing would fluctuate so fast we couldn't keep up with it, well, we'd farm out some of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd had that experience before, and it was kind of good to get up there in the purchasing department and farm out a lot of that stuff after I didn't have any responsibilities in machine shop anymore, because there wasn't any machine shop left.
Yeah.
Only the sheet metal, and Prickett had charge of that.
Didn't Augie Rump, when they phased out the machine shop, he just decided to retire, I think?
Yeah, he decided to retire just before they get rid of it a while.
Yeah.
So Augie went at 52, or 62.
Yeah, he said that was, his work was done and he was just getting out.
Yeah.
Which, a real interesting interview with Og.
Yeah, Augie, he's a good boy.
Yeah, real interesting.
Yeah, and he's sincere. I mean,
Yes.
He puts his heart and soul in everything he does. He wants to do a good job and do it right.
Right.
He believes in doing what he does right.
Yeah.
I've always had a lot of respect for Augie, and I think Augie always had for me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I felt he did.
Well, I think that this has been interesting. Is there anything else for history that you want to stick on the record? Because this will go to the Indiana State Library, and of course here, and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, generations unborn will be listening to your voice and reading your script. And
Well, back years ago, there used to be a lot of things happen when I was working on the screw machines and so on, a night trick mostly. I don't know what I should tell it.
Sure, put them on here. Might as well.
Well, at that time there was a fellow by the name of Verlin Dieter and myself. Worked for a foreman on the automatic screw machine by the name of Bill Hexmer. And that's back in the homebrew days and moonshine days, before Prohibition come back. And Bill, he liked his booze, so he'd go up Chicago and buy 2 5-gallon cans of booze about every month, and he'd sell one, and he'd get enough out of it to pay for the other that he'd drink. Of course, at that time, they wasn't as strict on drinking on the job as we got later. And this fellow by the name of Jake Fisher, that was inspector over the automatic screw machines, the hand screws on the night shift. And Jake and Bill Hexmer, they didn't like each other too well. They was always at each other's throat. And so one night, it was back in the little room at the end of the department where they kept the cams and all the tools, and there's a big chest there. It had 4x4 legs on it, about so high off the floor. And Jake Fisher or Bill Hexmer was back there one night taking a little nap. And Verlin and I had watched Bill's machine and keep them adjusted and parts coming, and he'd have about as many parts at the end of the shift as if he'd have been sober and working. And Jake went in there with one night with a heavy twine, and he tied a slip knot around Bill's leg and around that 4x4 leg and on his other leg, and then he got out there and he hollered, "Here comes Roby," along about 2 o'clock in the morning. Roby, of course, superintendent.
Yeah.
And he dropped in once in a while at night,
Yeah.
after midnight, just to see how he's getting along. And old Bill got up and started out there, and he come to the end of that slack that was in that, and his feet quit going, see?
Uh-huh.
And the floor was all greasy with them automatics, threw the grease out on the floor, and he fell down, and boy, he skinned his chin and knocked the wind out of him, and he really got a bad fall. And we got a big kick out of that. But then later on, there was down in the boiler room, there was a hole about so big where a pipe had come up through, and we had a funnel that held about 4 gallon, I guess, and it went in these barrels and a bung hole in the barrel, and we'd pour our refused oil in there and stuff. We'd take out the machines and we'd clean them out. when it become rancid. And so Jake was sitting down there one night, leaning up back in that boiler, nice and warm on his back, you know, and Bill happened to see him. So he came up and got a 5-gallon bucket about full of water and stuck that big funnel down this hole, and it was right above Jake. And he poured this water in that bucket. Boy, it went down all over him. And he did it for revenge, see, because he got him, made a bad spill there.
Yeah.
But there used to always be somebody playing tricks on somebody like that around there.
Yeah. Did they both stay on in Honeywell over the years?
They stayed on until after they consolidated, and then they left. The automatics left, why Tony left, or the foreman. He left, Bill Hexmer. And Fisher left before that, I think. You know, maybe right after they consolidated.
Always had a lot of fun at work then.
Yeah, we did. Reed Matthews, he was a football player, and he used to, every time he'd see a box or something that he could kick, he'd say, I'll make a drop kick now. And he'd kick the thing and go across the room. There's a fellow named Arthur Carpenter worked in there for a while in the experimental department, tall, slim fellow, and he was always playing pranks on somebody. So there's a piece of cast iron just about the size of a shoebox. And he says to this fellow one day, Reed went over to the main plant for something, and he said to this fellow, now watch Reed kick his shoebox when he comes in. And he had a bottom part of a shoebox there, and he lays this piece of cast iron down right in from the door, just about right for Reed to run. He put the shoebox over, and everybody was there at their bench working, and sure enough, the door opened, and old Reed said, hey, fellows, watch me make a drop kick. And he ran and kicked that shoebox, and it just slid about 6 inches, see, and he picks up his foot, and he hopped on one leg back to his bench, and he said, I can whip the so-and-so that put that piece of cast iron under there. And nobody would tell on old Carpy. Of course, he didn't know who did. But he came back after dinner, and he had the whole top of his shoe cut out there. His toe was all bandaged up. It broke his big toe, I guess, or sprained it. And it was all swelled up. And but there was always somebody playing a trick on somebody down there at that time. And in those days, you could do it and get away with it pretty well. But later on, when you got the unions and things, why, the horseplay had to quit.
How was the safety in the factory back in those days?
Oh, they didn't put as much effort forth safety-wise back in those days as they did later years. But they try to be safety-minded. I mean, top management would hand it right on down to all of us. And in our meetings, I know Mose would always bring it up about safety and so on. Mm-hmm. And we were all pretty much safety conscious, and we'd watch over the employees, see some guy doing something that was hazardous or dangerous, or we'd call it their attention, have a little talk with them about it, and so on. And we'd try to be sure that everything had a guard on it, shield it so that it wouldn't be hazardous if it was that nature. But there'd still be an accident happen occasionally.
Yeah. Of course, there was no insurance or anything back in the early days when you started, was it?
Mm-mm. No, they used to have just a local employees welfare association, I think they called it. Each month or each payday, they deduct so much out of your check. Mm-hmm. And if an employee was off sick, why, under certain conditions, why, they got so much a week and what have you. Mm-hmm. And that went along for quite a while, and then they finally got into group insurance with travelers. Mm-hmm. And they pointed out to all of us that if an epidemic should come along and last quite a while, it'd wipe out it'd deplete our treasure, and wouldn't have any money left. So it'd be better to get into something big like that could financially withstand an epidemic or something.
Yeah.
And so we did, and that's when it started. At first, I think the insurance I had was with travelers. Then they come along with a deal where they put it in effect that after you was there 6 months, why, they'd give you a $500 paid-up life insurance policy, and each year you was there, it increased $100 until it reached $2,000. And that was sort of an incentive in a way. And then later on, why, they got the superimposed insurance that went along with that cost you 50 cents $1,000 a month, and you couldn't afford to pass it up. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if you didn't need it, well, it was cheap insurance. And if you didn't need it, you have it. And if you carried that up until the time you retired, the superimposed insurance, you could transfer that into an individual paid policy if you wanted to, and so on. I did. Of course, a certain percent drops off each year for about the first 3 years, till you get down to where you got about 20% of it left that you can carry, which is enough. I mean, after all, your family's raised, and you don't have a lot of financial obligations when you get up around 68, which you would be when it drops down.
What future do you look for in Honeywell?
You mean here now?
Any place?
Do I look for?
Yeah.
Well, I don't look for a future at Honeywell.
No, I mean, what future do you look
You mean
for the factory, for the company?
For the company? Oh, I don't know. I hadn't given it a whole lot of thought, but they seem to be getting stronger and bigger every year, and they got a lot of know-how within the organization and a lot of ability. People with ability have had all these years to carry on like it has, and keep the stock up like it is, and pay the dividends they have, and what have you. Yeah.
Anything else? I'm going to close her up.
Well, I think we've pretty well covered it.
Yeah. I want to thank you. This has really been an interesting interview, and I know that you'll look forward to seeing the printed copies so that you can make any corrections, omissions, deletions, or additions that you want to, or anything else that you want to. And this is George Dingledy for the Wabash Carnegie Public Library.